Nigeria is so patriotic, and I think you're right. It has to be conscious because you know, I went to school when we were younger, and you know, you were taught your past presidents, you were taught about the Biafran War, you were taught about all these things as well as the World War IIs and you know whatnot. But we learned very early that it's important to know these histories, whether in art or literature or music, you know, Fela and all that. So I found it strange actually that Ghana was very different to that because there's so many wonderful artists and creatives, and also the history of here in particular. So yeah, I think it has to be a conscious decision. Yeah, I do agree with that.
So just before we move on to another contribution, so right, you've spoken a lot about KNUST and the work that's being done there. I think I realized that at the tertiary level, especially at Tech, there is that kind of work happening. But when students are exposed to only the canon, right, from an early age, I mean, what does that do? What does that do to their psyche, right? If they don't make a conscious effort or a conscious choice to choose to do visual arts in university, by which time, I mean, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of late. Don't you think that there's a need to introduce these things early? I don't know if I completely agree with your point about having to know I do think that we should have a wide lens when we're learning about art, but I think that we do have to be intentional with including continental art in the curriculum from a really early age. Kids are learning about what is beautiful, right? We talk about this in other areas. We talk about this in sociology. You know, what forms people's perceptions. These things happen really early on. So if you're looking at the work of, I don't know, Vermeer, and you've been taught that this is the standard, you know, look at how he uses light and look at the, I mean, you're shown what is a beautiful subject, right? And you're told to run with that. When I was teaching, I would have students who would draw themselves and they color and they take the, you know, the peach crayon, the one that looks like white people, and they would color themselves in with it. And I would look at them like, you know, Paulina, is that how you look? She'd be like, oh, you know, I wanted to draw myself looking like a princess, or you know, I wanted to make myself look beautiful in the painting, and this was beautiful. I think we need to look at that.
How old?
Sorry, how old? So I taught from year 1 up to year 7, and then I later taught high school. The person I'm talking about right now was in year 4. So that's about, like 8? Yeah, about 8.
But, you know, you're making the case, the mandate for a national consciousness. You know, when you're 1 year old, when you're in primary school, it's not what you're learning in school that's created that perception of how you see yourself. It's all the things around you, it's the environment that's been created. You know, so we're actually talking about the arts, I think, on 2 levels. And I'm going to go to your point, that it's not about whether or not we're all going to be artists. Okay, obviously artists have a responsibility to reflect the world we live in. Okay, but somehow that comes from a national perspective. But when I think of primary education or early education, the role of art in education, I think first of all it's really important because when children are young, they're visually active and they're physically active. So the arts are obviously a very viable, easy way to capture their imagination and to engage them in the learning process. Okay, so we're thinking about art as process. While the adults are out, that's like creating an environment that reflects whatever it is we're trying to have these young people imbibe. You know, and again, you're just making a constant point for reference. What are our reference points? You know, and how do we create an environment that reflects them? And that goes
sorry, just quickly, can the people in the back hear everything we're saying? No? Sorry, okay. We'll try and speak up.
They should move forward.
You can come forward.
Yeah, there are seats in the front. We'll try and speak up as well, but there are also seats.
No, but there's seats here.
Close to the
We're
seats.
top of the seats. We're top of the.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I think Bright, were you about to say something?
Yeah, she kind of threw me off. But that was because she said something I actually wanted to say.
Okay.
You know, with regards to the fact that that example of your student who, for instance, wanted to color her drawing with a pink flesh tone.
Yeah.
I think it goes beyond what is within just the arts education,
Oh, definitely.
but on the broader scale. And I would like to reference maybe the television. You know, if you are aware, these conversations have been had, especially about the kind of content that is produced for children to consume. Talk about the fairy tale movies, you know, and lately Hollywood has become aware of that. I hope it hasn't only become just another tool to market their work, but you know, there's diversity is now like a buzzword. Everyone creates something and you slap some diversity on it. So I think it's something that goes beyond just the arts education. And again, like Renee said, there has to be that reference. And so you ask yourself, do we have one? Is there like that national agenda where we know who we want to be as a nation, we have a particular vision, and so we will create content like this to influence our children now, so that in the next 20 years they think like this and act like that. Do we have all those things in place? And the sad thing is, if we don't, we'll keep using the references others have, and it's going to keep producing the kind of people that fortunately or unfortunately we are, because we consume those things. I also consume a lot of those things. And I think that's what it is with that. There needs to be that reference, which maybe we don't have enough of.
Yeah, I agree. I told Nestle I wouldn't say this, but just as a disclaimer. No, so when we were coming, I was arguing, this is completely an aside. I was arguing with Natalie about my hair and covering. I was like, oh my god, I just organized an event and probably she's like, she's wearing a wig. Yeah, just so you guys know, I was having a bad hair day. This is flag signifying anyway. I just wanted to invite Andrea to join us. So Andrea is our second moderator, and she was really...
Andrea here.
Okay.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Andrea.
I gave you introduction. Yeah. So I'm gonna continue part of the conversation, and like you can interject with your contributions or questions. We want it to be like an open discussion, not really like just us controlling the conversation, but also like an exchange. I don't know if Debbie already said that. So, but we were talking earlier about images and like how the children were kind of had the white imagery in their head when they were thinking of like the ideal and how to represent themselves. So a question I have for you guys and everyone is how, sorry, I'm not loud. Okay, sorry.
Come to the front.
Yeah, a question I have for the panelists and everyone is, so what role, apart from educational institutions, what role do art institutions, whether locally or institutions you partner with outside in the diaspora, what role do they have to kind of enforce or just to represent African artists more and to kind of broaden the idea, the idea of who is part of the canon or the best artists here.
What is the role?
How do we do that?
Well, I mean, we don't have enough institutions yet. I mean, I feel that, I spoke about this earlier, but I think we need more. Our art ecosystem needs to grow. It needs to be stronger. I think that, and partnering, I think, actually, diaspora is really good. I do a lot of partnering with African or galleries in the States and the UK and Berlin, of people who are from African descent or the diaspora. But unfortunately, they don't tend to be seen or heard as much as other galleries that are not necessarily from here that show African art for whatever reason. Because it's controlled by the West. So, but I do think that the institutions it's important to show and have pride in the artwork and the creatives, and and support them in whatever way they can. Like a lot of people didn't even know about UK, for example. In Ghana and Ghanaians, which I thought was really sad because it's such a wonderful institution and they do what they can to push the agenda. And they are the ones that people will come here and see this and see images of artists, James Arnold, whoever they're showing, and then go home wherever in the world and talk about it. But I think it's like a national, like a local consciousness. I wish that that the institutions need to, or the role of institutions to maybe awaken that local consciousness. I got there.
Well, I think that's a private institution. The onus also falls on the state. They're supposed to be the custodians of everything that is Ghanaian. So the state primarily has to be in the position not to dictate, but to provide the facilities and the logistics so that private individuals, private institutions that have the know-how can operate. But it also seems to be something that is lacking. And so if that is checked, I think a lot of maybe creatives who create here will have access to show here. We can develop that ecosystem that you're talking about so that not everybody has to do that journey to the West End before they realize whatever they want out of their work. You can be here, make your work here, sell it here, become successful here without necessarily having to go and show in any so-called traditional art center in the world. So I think the state has to actively, we know that they don't know how, but they have the money and the means. So make it available for those who know. When it happens that way, a lot of people will choose to rather work on the periphery. You don't want to engage that lethargic, slow process, red tapeism and all that. So the state just has to provide the means and then let private individuals who know how to do these things come on board and work. That is what I think.
I mean, I remember, and I think it is pushing the state to do a better job. I remember when the fort at Cape Coast, the slave castle there, when they created that exhibition initially, there was a fabulous film done by Kwa Ansa, okay, that was in a very small theater that you actually went to see the film before you went through the gallery and then took the tour of the castle. And that was a profoundly, historically insightful and visually beautiful film, okay? And this goes back to something else that's a broader issue, and that is simple maintenance. The damn projector broke down and they never fixed it again. Okay, and that film is a world-class film, shows images from around the diaspora. So there are some people from the past that were doing really important work in terms of trying to create public art. But it goes back again to the state and that this dropping the ball business in terms of maintenance and building on what's done. Something gets done, it's new, it lives until it dies, and bam. Okay, but there's been a lot of interest. In fact, I'll also put a plug in for Kwa Ansah's new museum up there in Takoradi, which is a magnificent piece of work. It's a monumental effort that he's put forward there. And I think it's sharing that information, and also, again, something that seems to be a kind of uniquely African problem is everybody thinks they have to do their own thing all the time. It's always the one, and trust me, somewhere in some proverb they say, no matter how big one head is, two are always better. And I think if people begin to think like that and bring to bear all these various resources and skills, we might see some incremental change.
Okay. So you mentioned the state and private partners. So I want us to think about funding and like alternative pathways that we can use, even in the midst of not receiving the state support. I feel like even when we do sort of private projects or like private institutions, there's kind of like a threshold to which like you can only do so much in terms of like funding yourself or supporting yourself or getting reach in the local space or internationally. So how do we navigate that? Like, what are the other ways we can use? Which ways are we not looking at in terms of like getting funding or just support?
So can I just add on to that question? And in getting funding, so what tends to happen is we're reaching again to the West, right, for that funding. So we're asking people who don't have our interests at heart. I mean, how can we avoid? Sorry.
I said they're also dictating how you
Exactly. So how do we sidestep that? Especially when we know that the power, is it's basically centered in the West.
I think there's I think there's a couple of viable ways. The West is not only Europeans. If we know our history, we would know that most of the West are Neo-African cultures. Okay, most of the West, America included, are Neo-African cultures. Okay, what distinguishes America from the rest of Europe is everything Africa took there: jazz, blues, rock. So I think if we have a broader sense of who the diaspora is and who we are to the diaspora, we could really access resources in a way that's mutually beneficial.
Very true.
Thank you. You should just say it. And I can give you a very, very clear example of that.
Please do.
Okay? The forts, let me take the example of the forts and castles, all right? Cape Coast. If we looked at our history and not just saw African Americans as somebody you get over here for a couple of weeks and hustle and break down for a few pennies while you chase them with with inferior goods. If you saw them, as partners in a world effort to make sense of who we are as African people, we could make huge strides. And I can tell you, this is just one example, but I can remember looking at when they were doing that museum at Cape Coast. And I remember suggesting that we have one room at Cape Coast that could be like a memorial room, okay, where Africans in the diaspora could rent space for a particular period of time and hang maybe a picture of a relative that they loved and knew in memory of one they will never know, okay? This is just an organizational thing, and that exhibit could change all the time, all right? People would pay to do that. If somebody had the wherewithal and the organizational structure to simply put together a newsletter with 80 million Africans in Brazil, over 20 million in America, if you got $1, 50 cents from a third of them, to do something significant, like put a world museum here, and you kept people abreast of what was going, and it was managed, and people could actually track their funds and see what was going on. If we could look at those forts and castles and not just prey on people's weeping and wailing about what happened in the past, but have the strength to say that, they call that the door of no return or the gate of no return, but you're here, which means you defied prophecy. So you not only defied prophecy and came back, but you came back to celebrate what was made from that unfortunate period of history. Maybe every 2 years we had a calypso and reggae concert. Maybe another 2 years you could advertise in advance you're gonna have a rock concert and a jazz concert or a blues concert. If there was just any minute level of structured organization, the money is there. I can tell you that, the money is there. But you can't keep scamming people and hustling people for a few pesos. You have to actually get yourselves together, organize and put on some world-class stuff, and the money would flow. People would save for 2 years to come here.
It's true.
Clap for me.
Renee said, it's not just the diaspora, actually, a lot of the funding I do comes from other African countries. You know, it's not just us. You know, there's a lot of Pan-Africanism is really important as well. And I think there's a lot of other Africans who have interest in the arts, not from here, that really see, you know, want to support and put money into what is happening here because they think it's exciting, you know. So I think that's another place you can target. I personally never been funded by a Western company. It's only African, you know, but just something South African, Nigerian, or Kenyan. You know, so, but I think we should also look into that as well on the continent.
So just quickly before I come to you, this was really why I wanted to add the word Pan-African. It wasn't just because of your return, but it was actually because I was reading Nkrumah's Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, and just reading that book, I was just like, it pained me.
Thank you.
Because, you know, he laid out so much so early on. And if we had just read it, I mean, we would have, yeah, it's sad. It's sad. But just looking at the strength of what Pan-African just integration did around that period. I mean, we know that Du Bois. Sorry.
Du Bois.
I always do that. Du Bois, Martin Luther King, like so many people were in Ghana learning from us. They came here to learn. If we could only reestablish those links, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
So
Yes.
I want to add up to.
Sorry, I'll say
I came quite late, so I don't know your name, but I want to add up to what she said regarding the Cape Coast idea. I don't know if any of us have been to Cape Coast before, but averagely, I'm sure within an hour, one is likely to probably exhaust all the attractions in Cape Coast. So for instance, year of return, you come with your friends, you go to Cape Coast, within an hour, you are done. All the money leaves Cape Coast, what happens to it? So I think that we need to prolong the tourist attraction in some of these areas, not necessarily just coming to see castles and forts and all these things, because all these things, to be honest with you, can be exhausted within an hour. So if you come with a chunk of money, at the end of the day, all the money comes back to Accra. So we need to find a way to actually prolong the visitor experience in some of these places so that we can actually maximize the emissions of money.
Does anyone else have anything you want to jump in with?
It's funny you brought up neocolonialism because I was thinking, what role does that play a part in the curriculum that you guys need? How do you think we could infuse that, or how does that play into our education?
The idea of neocolonialism or that specific book?
The idea of it.
So, I mean, I think that we really underestimate what kids can understand. I think that, you know, it's hard, honestly. It's really hard. When I think about even the curriculum that I'm trying to create, I realize that I cannot present this to the Ministry of Education and they'll just be like, oh, go ahead, go and do it. we don't even have art as a subject.
I was gonna ask, what does Ghana currently have and what's your?
We have some subject called creative arts. When you look at the curriculum, it's laughable. Okay, it's laughable and there are no resources to even teach it if they taught it well. So it's tough. The problem is the government is not prioritizing the arts at all. When you, just being in Cambridge for the first few weeks, listening to where people are from, like the most obscure countries, and seeing the amount of investment their governments are putting into, their art galleries, their museums, their just preserving their histories, their languages. We have not thought, I actually don't know what the issue is, no, I do, actually.
A lot of times art education is the first thing cut out of budgets.
Yeah.
In the US, it's always
Yeah. That even if we decide we're throwing away art, what are we doing with the other subjects? Even if you decided to cut away art, why don't we teach history? Why has Ghanaian language been something that is vilified in schools? I mean, there are so many little issues, and it all points back to the fact that we look at the West as the standard, right? We're not even creating space within our own country for ourselves. And we're so quick to extend the hand to the West, give them whatever is required for us to get, if the few pennies they'll throw at us. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm upset. Sorry, did I see a hand over here somewhere?
No, I was affirming what you were saying when you said, people put out their hands for the few pennies that they get, because that is actually the truth. And I think that we were talking earlier about children, underestimating what children can actually absorb and understand. I think one forgets that children absorb and understand what they see around them and what they hear around them. And I think it's really important that parents do a little bit more in terms of preparing them within for the without, and not the other way around. And I think that is where a crucial opportunity is often lost. So anyone here who has a child, I think, no, seriously, I'm actually being really serious. They imbibe an awful lot more, much earlier than we can ever recognize or realize. And so it's important that a lot of those images, those visual images, the auditory sounds, are those that are authentic to who they are, who their parents are, and who their families are. And then it's much easier for them to resonate, or for the art that is originally indigenous to them to resonate with them, rather than have to learn how to appreciate it.
Can I just pick up on that? That's an excellent point. Natalie and I worked in a project years ago where we went to a small village. And what's interesting, in that small village, the local kids, this was way up in Benin, were completely aware of the culture. They were culturally very vibrant. They could all do the traditional dances. They knew the drumming. They knew the names. They knew the chieftaincy. They had a cultural literacy that you rarely find when you come to the urban environment. Interestingly enough, or unfortunately, they don't have the language to articulate what they're experiencing. And it's almost like that's what they do in the bush. When in fact, I think if I were in a position from an educational perspective, I don't know if I'd push for an art course. I think I'd push for a course called Culture and Tradition. Because if we could, and they do have that somewhere you still have something called culture, cultural studies, but nobody takes it seriously. But if they looked back at what that could mean in terms of how kids used to learn critical thinking through riddles, okay, or how history was passed on through storytelling, for me, that all encompasses the arts. We have a more integrated approach in how we think about the arts, both visually and in terms of dance and music, and and the history and the culture around it, the traditions. What does all that stuff mean? Once that somehow got into a public discourse, and kids could be grounded in that. That's the beginning of something. You can't fight for everything at once, but it would really be great if we could begin to articulate what cultural traditional studies can be.
Back to the work.
Okay, sorry. The other thing I was going to say is that there's a lot of money in Africans' pockets for art. No, don't laugh. It's very true. The arts that are being sold in Sotheby's for millions are mostly being bought by Africans. They remain anonymous, but they are Africans. And it's important that we recognize what's going on at that level, that macro level as well as the micro level. Because somebody said it earlier, strategically engaging that group, small but very deep-pocketed as they are, and clearly invested in preserving African art because they're paying millions for it, is one of the ways you start to generate support at the micro level. And so I think that we have to open the space up in a very, very real way and start looking a little further afield and beyond some of the boundaries that we see all the time. You can throw those aside if you really know what you're after.
Sorry, me again. I just had a question about using the decolonization project, as you mentioned, seeing it as a framework in which you can also kind of tackle other intersections, such as social class and gender, for example. Do you maybe have any ideas or viewpoints on how to navigate those through this discussion as well?
Some of the notions that we have about all these topics, like you mentioned, gender, social class, a lot of our I stand to be corrected, but a lot of our notions we have about it presently are the kind of ideas that we inherited through that colonialism project. So if you tend to consciously decolonize one aspect, and especially arts, I believe even without your conscious effort, it begins to open new ways for you to look at all these other aspects. For example, the kind of education that I received in the art department at KMUST, and I will always reference that. It wasn't just reading about art and like maybe painting or drawing or even art history, but then you were taught to look at the social conditions that maybe influenced certain creatives in certain periods. And so while you were looking at the art, which was the results of all the influences, you're also looking at the influences